Welcome back to this second Pathways panel, coming to you live from Nile in Edinburgh. Now, since our last inaugural panel on International Women's Day, we've been pretty busy building on the themes of this, Pathways, a new approach for women in entrepreneurship, and of course launching our new collective movement called, fittingly enough, Pathways Forward. So do follow us on LinkedIn. You can watch back that first video if you missed it, get the latest news and conversations about women in entrepreneurship, and most importantly of all, you can tell us what you think, what you want us to be doing. There's a link to that today under the YouTube video, so please, if you've got time, send us in a question and we'll try and get to those towards the second half of this today, so you can get your question answered, hopefully live. Now, my name is Dr. Vanessa Collingridge, and I'm delighted to have with me a panel of leading business experts to continue our discussion on the report itself, its wider context, their insights from the world of entrepreneurship, and critically to discuss what action needs to happen now. With me today, Professor Noreen Arshed holds the chair of entrepreneurship at the University of Dundee. A former senior government economist, her stellar research on especially women in entrepreneurship led her to become an independent advisor to the Scottish Government and to publish her 2021 report on the impact of COVID-19 on Scotland's women entrepreneurs. Laurel Quinn is CEO of Code Clan and previously co-founder and chief exec at FinTech for Good Sustainably. An award-winning entrepreneur with a proven track record, she's passionate about tech for good and helping Code Clan scale up to close Scotland's digital skills gap. Mark Logan has a long and astounding track record in startups and internet tech companies, probably best known as COO of Skyscanner, one of Europe's most successful tech companies, amongst many other roles. He's now Chief Entrepreneurial Advisor to the Scottish Government and co-author of the Pathways Report, which of course was written with its chair, Anna Stewart, investment partner with EOS, formerly founder of fintech business iDesign, non-exec director at the Scottish Football Association, and Bella and Duke. Well, thank you all for joining us on the panel today to delve deeper into some of the issues raised by the Pathways report into women and entrepreneurship. Anna, maybe I could start with you. It's been over 2 months, isn't it, since we have launched this, since you launched this. So what's happened and what still needs to happen?
Well, everyone's aware of there's been quite a lot of change in government since it was launched. Very shortly after the report was published, there was a change of cabinet and a change of First Minister. So obviously that has posed some challenges in making sure it stayed front of mind in government. But that's something that we've been doing and focused on, ensuring that it doesn't fall between the cracks. So that's been one of the things we're doing, and we're at the stage now where we've re-engaged with a number of people within government, and we have got commitment for a response from Neil Gray, who is the CABSEC for the Wellbeing Economy, Fair Work and Energy. And he, in fact, there was a question tabled last week again about the Pathways report on the Economy Committee. And Neil's confirmed he was speaking to me later in the week, and I've been assured that he will come back to the team and the Pathways report with a formal response. So that's what we're pushing, and we've been doing that, very aggressively, making sure that we do get a response and hopefully get embracing of the recommendations. That said, we don't know what it will say, so it's an opportunity again here to discuss it and highlight how important it is that we embrace all the steps and the recommendations and the folio of interventions that we've recommended they adopt. So that's one strand. One of the other things is, as you know, the report was overwhelmingly positively received, and we're very, very grateful for that. And we didn't want to lose the impact that that's had, because we've had so much engagement from the private sector and other organisations that are trying to support entrepreneurship and women in entrepreneurship. So we also decided that we felt that it was an opportunity to make sure there's a collective movement which has really created this momentum, and one of the outputs of that is the Pathways Forward brand, which we hope will just allow people to connect, engage, exchange information, but ultimately for anyone who is involved in the ecosystem, founders, organisations, advocates, that can come there to see what's happening there and make sure people are connected, and that we can drive that forward using the principles of the outputs of Pathways.
Mark, you're very much on the inside of government from that regard. What's the mood music like from the inside?
So I should say this, I don't speak for the government, but I do have some visibility, obviously, as an advisor. I'd say the mood music is probably a combination of Walking on Sunshine by Katrina and the Waves, was it? And
yep.
Rage Against the Machine. I think it's recognised in many parts of government and other stakeholders that what's emerging in Scotland is a really strong, coherent, cohesive strategy to develop entrepreneurship, and that really matters because every job that's represented across our audience today and in this room exists because someone at some point started something. So it's really, really important that if we continue to create opportunity for our people in the future, that we have a coherent strategy for the country for that. And what Pathways does is two important things. One is it extends that strategy, so it builds and reinforces it, which means that not just the focal area of this report, but all entrepreneurs and would-be entrepreneurs everywhere benefit from that. And it seeks to enfranchise a much larger group of the population into entrepreneurship than were previously able to access it the way that the other half could. So what that does is double our entrepreneurial heft. It creates great opportunities and great energy. So to that, there's a real optimism, I think, in government that we can do something really, really important. And I was thinking of a meeting that took place last week. It was a meeting at Oxford University of ecosystem builders from across Europe and the UK. And there was a general sense amongst those, very capable and insightful people that Scotland is actually starting to lead in how you build entrepreneurial ecosystems in at least Europe, if not further afield. And that Pathways is another opportunity to change the game again and really bring some balance to our ecosystem. So I think politicians want to be part of that, officials and government want to be part of that. So I think we're at a very exciting moment. Now, of course, as Anna said, we need to convert that moment into further action.
Laurel, you obviously come at this from the point of view of being a female entrepreneur. So what's your reaction to what you've seen with the Pathways report, and what have you heard from other female entrepreneurs?
Yeah, I mean, certainly from my perspective, the Pathways report is a great foundation on which to build. I mean, we talk a lot about digital skills shortages and the gender divide, the lack of talent in tech, for example, but that dial has not been moving sufficiently fast to close the skills gap. And when we have such a small proportion of women in tech, that means that all the products and services that we're consuming when tech touches our everyday lives in such a massive way has a huge impact. And we know that diverse teams create better products, have better outcomes for the customers, are actually even higher performers in terms of revenue generated. So why can't we start kind of really empowering women to get involved in tech, close that skills gap by making the changes that we know we need to do to kind of empower that change to happen. So I think from my perspective, it's great to see that there is such a focus in moving the dial and clear routes to make that happen. And it's very much a collaborative effort and how we can all work together. From my perspective, again, it's not just about closing the gender gap. It's about how can we get everyone on that trajectory. How can we work with other minority groups that aren't that are underrepresented in technology to really bring them along on this journey as well. So there's a lot of effort involved at what we're doing at Code Clan in terms of how we close the gender gap and how we work with other groups to get more talent into tech, because there is a lot of talent out there. So why are we not leveraging it?
Absolutely. Noreen, you, of course, have written your own report a few years back now. Is there a frustration that we've had this brilliant Pathways report, it's gone down a storm, and there's always an and yet, we're just not seeing it sort of, right, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, we're going to see it into action?
Yeah, so, excuse me. So again, you know, I've written 2 reports for Scottish Parliament, Scottish Government. Sarah Carter before me has written a report. Anna and Mark have now written, you know, this amazing report, which has been fantastic. And the government's very slow to move. So I think we need to keep on at them. So, you know, none of the reports show anything different. We're building on research, but nobody's telling us anything different. We're still where we are in women's enterprise. In Scotland, in the UK, where we were 30 years ago. So we need to, you know, Anna and I think Mark are doing a fantastic job in trying to gain traction and just pushing this through to government. And what we're looking for is real commitment, not announcements, not promises, not headline figures. We're looking for real commitment and real financial support, but that financial support also includes, you know, the skills, addressing the skills shortages, addressing women entrepreneurs at every level, from start-up all the way through to scale-up, also from rural to city to urban to community level, all the way through. So we're hitting every single woman who wants to be entrepreneurial, and that is a whole host of different things. And I think Anna's report very neatly gives us recommendations on how that the government can look to implement these recommendations, and we will reach a larger audience of women in Scotland.
So, enough with words then. Anna, if I can come back to you then, on actions then, what specific concrete actions do you think we should be focusing on first? We know that there's a world economic recession, it's like, you know, troubled times. We've got limited amounts of cash. Where do we start?
Yeah. Well, there are 31 recommendations in that report, and you know, we talked to it at the very beginning how important it is to it's a folio of interventions. You know, the root causes right through to the proximate causes, and you can't just do one of them. However, ultimately, you can't do them all at the same time either. So, you know, in terms of the areas that we want to make sure the government are embracing are things like this different way of reaching entrepreneurs and those that are not represented enough in the ecosystem just now. And things like PUPs, you know, the pop-up pre-starts, to me is a very important first initiative for them to embrace, because it opens up an opportunity for those that are not getting in just now, and reaching people in parts of the community that Noreen alluded to. And it also allows, you know, hopefully with the collaborative approach that that Laurel's mentioned there, how important it is that we connect the dots and get everybody at the different stages working together, but actually being able to see the path. And that getting in the door, you know, the door is shut for many, many people in Scotland, and what we're trying to do is open it in a different and creative way. And I think that's what PUPs is an example of one of those.
So, Mark, can you run through what PUPs would look like on the ground?
Thank you. Certainly. So, this is a great example of how we can build policy that reinforces prior policy and vice versa. So where we are right now in that coherent strategy journey I was talking about earlier is that we've already put in place a network of what are called tech scalers. These are incubation environments with world-class education and other support to help founding teams develop. And in this first instantiation, it is based in major cities, etc. Now, what we're trying to do with beyond that is start to take that out further into the community and to reach more parts of Scotland. What PUPs does, as Anna said, is it brings a version of what I've just described, not a tech-orientated version, but an incubation and support and expertise and microfunding environment to where primary carers are, for example. And we can use the same solution to reach rural entrepreneurs, for example, or would-be entrepreneurs in more disadvantaged areas of our cities where these centres aren't normally placed.
So are we talking about going into a library, going into a school, going into a cafe?
Examples would be things like, we could use disused retail space in a shopping centre 1 week a month, or library space. There's lots of ways you could instantiate this, and it will vary depending on the area. And I think that the best way to implement this is as follows. It's not to put in place government dictated, set of white vans that drive to places and displace existing solutions. When you start talking to people in entrepreneurial areas or ecosystem builders in different parts of Scotland, you find that we have really great people executing local initiatives with a real knowledge of local needs. And those essentially are our starting material for these pre-start centres. Some will be permanently based, some will be mobile. But what we should be doing is working, and I would call it a hyper-franchised model, to find and support these people and say, all you need to do is what you're doing just now plus this minimum service footprint, and we'll help you financially to do that. And that allows us to blend the goals of the Pathways Review with local knowledge at scale. Because, you know, one of the things that I think we sometimes fail on from a policy perspective historically is someone has a good idea and we do a pilot in a school or in a part of a town, and that lasts for 3 years and we tick a box saying, yeah, we're doing something here. The only pilots that matter are scaled pilots. So using that model allows us to get to scale immediately. So that's kind of how we're thinking about it. And I'm confident that we'll get that done.
Noreen, does this tie in with your own research about working at that really kind of granular level in the hard to reach communities?
Definitely it does. Everything Mark has just said, I echo that in terms of my own research. So there is, I think, in Scotland, the entrepreneurial ecosystem is fantastic. We've got lots happening, lots of people helping, supporting, assisting, but there's a lot of duplication. And there's it needs to be simplified. So like Mark mentioned, there's lots of things happening on the ground. People don't know about it. People don't know where to look. Some things are really good being delivered and implemented in certain areas by certain organisations. Others not so well, so we need to make it consistent. And I think these PUPs are a great way to get into the local communities, because if you take a step back and look at entrepreneurs in Scotland, the majority of them are not high-tech, fast growth, scaling up, or they're not scaling up or growing as fast as they could be. So we need to start at the beginning.
Give me an example of what you're talking about.
So, for example, if we're looking at women entrepreneurs in Scotland, 17% are, 20% since COVID, but that figure hasn't moved fast enough. So pre-COVID, it was 17% women-led businesses in Scotland, and that stat hasn't moved for years. Lately it's pushed up to 20% after COVID, but that's maybe, and I haven't done the research on this, but given anecdotal evidence, it could be that slight 3% increase has been due to push factors for women setting up their own businesses because of homeschooling, etc. But actually, to go into these local communities and set up and help and start up, most of them don't know about organisations that are happening, that are government funded. What they're looking at is libraries, are schools, where they can get easy access. And
presumably where there are no barriers to them
exactly.
accessing and entering the building.
Yes, and if we are looking for women to start up their businesses, they need easy accessible, easy, to understand where, who, when, why. So I think these pop-ups, or PUPs as known, I think this would be ideal for women. And then, there are, it's more of a holistic approach, working with organisations already on the ground and simplifying that support for them, and then going hand in hand if they want to grow. There's obviously, there's a pathway to growth, but I think it needs to be holistic, and I think this is a good way of that, and a holistic approach for especially specifically, women or those groups who are hard to reach.
Laurel, I can see you nodding through a lot of that. Drawing on your own experience and the many, many people, women entrepreneurs you've worked with, is that something that resonates with you about really taking the training, the opportunities, the grants, the business know-how to women rather than expecting them to go through a gateway?
Yeah, I mean, we've just conducted a piece of research on the intersectional barriers to getting more women into technology. Just to give context, and again, about statistics, the number of women employed in the technology sector has reached around 26%. It's probably fluctuating. And it's really not grown that much. And while the UK's job the tech job market is predicted to grow 6 times by 2025 to £30 billion. There's only going to be one qualified woman for every 115 roles, unless the situation changes dramatically. So it's really urgent action that's required, you know. And I think the idea of enabling women to access the relevant skills to get themselves on a trajectory and transform their lives, you have to make the training to get those skills, to make it accessible. You know, women have caring responsibilities. They have, you know, they're typically, if they're not caring for children, they have caring responsibilities for other family members. They're kind of managing households. There's a massive pay gap at the moment, which means that unless that changes, it's more likely that women will be the ones that continue to stay at home. You know, they have different requirements for mentoring, and they can't quit their jobs and, you know, do things in a way because of all these barriers to funding, etc. So if we can create simple pathways that enable programs to be available, that have access to funding, that are delivered flexibly, that can be done in part-time, you know, we see a huge uptake from women in taking our programs at Code Clan, and that's exactly what we need to do. We need to go and facilitate programs in ways that make it super simple for women to access it, you know, and provide childcare and other support as necessary to kind of really change the trajectory of the opportunities for women, because otherwise we're going to be talking about this in 20 years' time.
Yeah, so society's got to do the changing.
Absolutely.
Now, Mark, this reminds me of something that I know you're very passionate about, which is the early education. So we're not just talking about going to women, we're going to talk to children. Is that right?
Yes, we need to do that, and I'll give you a simple illustration of why. So if you, and this is a very repeatable experiment, but if you take the IQ of children, so let's say a boy and a girl in a family, and separately you ask the parents of those children to estimate their IQs, again and again the male and female parents will estimate the boy's IQ to be higher than it actually is and underestimate the girl's IQ. Now, what that illustrates is that from the very, very earliest ages, we are establishing the sexism in our society that leads to all those other stereotypes. And who's actually establishing it? It's actually the parents. You know, it's us. We're all doing it because we've all went through the same processing engine. So how do we break that cycle? And you know, we've talked, and Laurel just mentioned, you know, how do we ensure that we're not having the same conversation in 20 years' time that we're having now? The reason we're having that is because we've all become anchored on extreme underparticipation as normal. Why do we think that's normal? Because we've been educated to believe that that's normal. So therefore, any progress against that is considered to, you know, even if it's like 0.1%, we declare success on that. You know, when International Women's Day, we find the single female engineer in the office and put her on the front page and celebrate all we're doing. And then we go back to our normal lives of huge gender imbalance, not just in entrepreneurship, but elsewhere. So I think where you break that cycle is you start educating not just children, not just, you know, university and college students, but including them, but also the rest of us. We need to start talking about this. It needs to be okay to say out loud, actually our society is based on a bunch of gender stereotypes that are rooted in the sexism of our society. And it shouldn't be controversial to say that because it's blatantly obvious wherever you look. And you know, it shouldn't have been controversial for Anna and I to write that in the report, but it was controversial. And that shows that education is needed. I don't think most men or women know that that study I talked about reveals those results. So I think we need an educational movement in Scotland. It certainly requires us to put that systemically in place in our universities, colleges and schools. But I think there's another solution required for how do we post-formal education adults get engaged in that discussion too. Because the continuing result of it is we're taking half of our best people out of economic activity in various forms, and we're creating an enormous injustice in our society that we then dare to call civilised. So I would submit that it's not until we address that issue. So education is critical here. And, you know, you asked Anna the question, where should we start? And I agree with, you know, what Anna said, that we should start with pups because it's something we can do now. But it is a mitigation of that deeper issue. So I believe we must also simultaneously start on this issue of dismantling our gender stereotypes.
Okay, Anna, I'm going to push you on this. So what might that look like in schools then?
Yeah, I
Or
think...
is school too late? Should we be doing this in nurseries?
Well, we want it throughout society. I mean, it's an embedded culture that we're trying to change here. And I think Pathways is, I wouldn't want to call it a novel approach, but it's trying to deal with the fact that the root cause effects, you can't change. You know, we talked about this last time about creating a fund for women, when that will not, that won't remove the problem because there's not enough women coming in. And that's highlighted when you see the scale up, where there's less than 2% of funding is going, of institutional investment is going to women. But that's partly because there are very, very few women entering into that space because they're not coming in. So there's no point in putting something there if you don't, get the foundations correctly done.
And as you say, it's that pathways, the whole concept of the pathways.
And within the context of Pathways specifically, we do, there's Startup Summer School. Again, that is about trying to create this entrepreneurial mindset. And it's not all about, starting a business, just understanding how to manage your money and what business means and what you look at and how do you interact with other people. And it's about being inclusive there. So that's just one strand. But we are, when we talk to the report, we do talk about how important it is to get equality, diversity, education, and a different mindset within school. And that is a big challenge. So, within Pathways, we look at the Startup Summer Schools as a good starting point for the entrepreneurship piece. But just again, touching on something that Laura said about Coquelin, you're, educating older, younger people, but older people as well, but not so much the children. But there's things like the Digital Extra Fund, which is available in Scotland, is all about trying to, support young children as well. And they should be focusing, and I'm sure they are, focusing on young girls as well to drive them to do tech. Because tech is such an important part of that, and if there's very few girls in tech or STEM pursuing a career in that space, you are closing doors in entrepreneurship, because entrepreneurship and all businesses are generally tech businesses. Some people would argue that they're an enabler if they're not the main product. They're certainly an enabler. So we really need to get on top of that. And again, that's tried to address that. We talk about a whole report should be done on looking at STEM and why there's such under-participation from girls in schools on that. And it is part of the conditioning that Mark talks about girls don't want to do it because they just don't feel comfortable in that space. And there's lots of reasons for that, but that is really root cause stuff that we need to address. And we do try to talk to that in the Pathways report.
Noreen, you mentioned something about this earlier, about just these hard to reach communities. Do we actually have the data that shows what's going on the ground?
That's one of the biggest challenges we have. We don't have gender disaggregated data. So we can give you an idea of what's happening on the ground, but we can't put stats to it because we just don't have the data.
And why not? What's not happening that should be happening?
We just don't collect it. When I say we, I'm saying everybody. I'm saying Scottish Government, I'm saying enterprise organisations. Some collect it. So, for example, I recently had a study which I did via Scottish Government about how much money was spent through COVID in financing and helping and supporting small businesses, where that money went, how it was used, etc. When we drilled down, we spoke to nearly 20 different enterprise organisations who were providing the funding, assisting with the funding. Not one of them could provide us gender disaggregated data. So when we asked, so how many women applied, how many women won the funding or were awarded the funding, none of them could tell us, because, like as Mark mentioned, I think earlier on, it's a tick box. They're not required to do it. Those who did it, I can't even think of any off the top of my head who actually took those figures. But in my report, if you look at it, we couldn't distinguish how many women and how many men we're awarding how much, because we didn't have, and that's a recurring theme. That isn't a one-off. That is, we don't know how many women do X, Y, Z. What we can say is give you a general overview and say the majority of women in Scotland are in the service sector. They're in low-paid, low-skill, start-up businesses. They work from home. They're one-woman bands. But other than that, we can't really drill down exactly how many women do what, how much, where, when, which region. And I think that is something that this is not a new issue, it's not a new challenge. This has been a challenge. I mean, I started my PhD 10 years ago, well, I graduated 10 years ago this year, and in my PhD I state, there's no gender disaggregated data, where is it, how can we get it? 10 years on, we're still having the same conversation with government.
So that, in a way, then, is, well, that would be an easy action, easy, she says. That would be a really obvious action. Then we've got to start collecting better data so we actually know whether the PUPs, whether the education is bearing results. But also, it very much speaks to what Mark was saying about we need to be addressing this fundamental lack of asking the right questions in society. What more can we be doing? What sexist structures do we need to change?
Yeah, I was just going to add to that. We do collect data on gender. We don't collect it on other things, which we've actually decided that we should be doing. But the gender data that we have at Code Clan is that when we run our immersive on-campus or remote online live programs, it's 27% female participation. But as soon as we go to part-time funded places, it rockets up into over the 50s. So we know that there is demand for our part-time program, which is the short courses at the moment. We don't have the full immersive program, which we are going to be launching later in the year, which will enable women or carers or those, you know, who can't come on campus, who can't join at certain times of the day to access the content. But there is definitely a massive uptake from women when we do a part-time funded program. And that is just, you know, a fact. And therefore, that's the part of the reason why we really want to launch a full immersive program, immersive style content program, which will enable women to get the same qualification but over a longer period of time to do it in a way that suits them, that works around their lives. And
so you know, flexible in its structure. Flexible, available from wherever you are, so you don't have to come onto campus. You can do it, you know, whenever you want, from wherever you want, and funded places for that as well. So
just adding to that a little bit as well. You know, I do think we need to have two strands to this. The data, there is more data, even in the year. There's a fantastic thing called the Gender Index, which is published every year now, and it is tracking data that you can get, which tells you information about the makeup of the Scottish entrepreneurial ecosystem, or how many businesses, and the makeup of that, including women. I think the thing for us to keep pushing is we need to get data coming back from organisations that are within the Scottish ecosystem that are tracking entrepreneurship take-up. And some are doing it, some aren't.
Why are they not doing it?
Because they've never been asked to or didn't think they needed to. And, you know, that probably, there's two levels to that. One is, I believe that government should be asking agencies that have funding from government, there should be an ask, an incentive for them to get that access to that funding, to ensure that they feed back in a standardised fashion, not in its own unique way. There's a sort of cohesive standard that everybody then submits, that then allows us to have a much more informed, sophisticated view of that makeup and stuff that you just talked about there, Laurel. But I do think there is some higher level gender index stuff out there, which, you know, is really, really powerful and helpful. And so we have no excuse now. We need to beef that up in Scotland to support that. I mean, I'm not, you know, there's one or two good things coming out of that as well. In terms of the gender index, the stuff that Mark touched on earlier about NSET and STER and pathways, you know, there is an appetite and a will to create entrepreneurship for everyone in Scotland, and we do drive it quite well as a home nation, as one of the UK nations. And that, if you look at the gender index, that does sort of highlight there is a very better perspective, a better number of younger people, Gen Z, taking up entrepreneurship, and women taking up entrepreneurship at that age, compared to other parts of the UK, United Kingdom, that are not so engaged in the discussion, things like pathways. So there are stuff that's high level, but it's absolutely critical that we get more data from the feeders and the ecosystem members, because there's very little. I think, Noreen, you highlighted that nothing has changed there. Yeah. And you can't really build great models and great solutions if you don't have very rich data. So yeah, I think that's probably quite an obvious thing to say, but it's amazing we don't have it.
So we're going to keep you busier.
Yeah, I think, Anna, the high level data we have, and we have great data from Gender Index, for the Labour from labour force survey at UK level and Scottish, a regional level. But what we really need is that real data, because what we're seeing is we're all in agreement nothing's changed in the past 20 years. So if we have better data, it means then that policy can be driven by that data, but exactly, it's more informed rather than, just looking at high-level data. We are getting there, but I think very, very slowly.
Now, don't forget, of course, if you've got questions, you can just drop them into us. There's a link at the bottom of this video. So do send your questions in, and if we've got time, we will certainly ask the panel as well. Send in your suggestions as well as your questions. So, Mark, I'm going to maybe put the cat among the pigeons a wee bit, or mixing my animal metaphors, tackle the elephant in the room. We're talking about women in entrepreneurship. Why have we got a man here today?
I think that reveals the very nature of the problem we're talking about. What we're describing is we have two things: a societal problem that removes opportunity from roughly half of our population, give or take, and an enormous opportunity to enrich the economic performance of the country. Now, if that was in any other arena, you wouldn't say, well, I think we'll only limit that to the discussion to the 30 to 40-year-olds or to the people who live in, every second street in Glasgow or some other arbitrary division.
Stroppy redheads.
Stroppy redheads, if you, I'll take your word for that. But we do with gender. We say, well, only women should be concerned about the loss of opportunity because it doesn't affect men. We don't do that in any other field of human endeavour. So I think the question is not why is a man sitting here today, but why is that strange? Why aren't there more male advocates out there saying, why do we put up with this societally? If you're a business owner and you're struggling to hire people, if you're a parent and your teenage child, son, daughter can't find a job, you should be saying, why did we deny half of our entrepreneurial capability from full expressions to create those jobs, to create those opportunities? So we've got to start thinking that way. And I think the more men who talk about that and who take the effort to actually educate themselves on that, then the better. I have had, like everybody else around this table, challenges in life. Things have gone well, things have gone badly. But I need to be more conscious that I've spent all of that life under the blanket of white male privilege. So it's just easier. And I think we've got to kind of come out from that blanket and say, well, how do we wrap that around more of the population? I just think we've got to be brave enough to talk about that. And, this isn't a zero-sum game. If you have more female entrepreneurs, you don't have less male entrepreneurs. You actually have more male entrepreneurs because you've got more economic activity. So we need to think about it differently, but we sure need to talk about it. And if we ghettoise that discussion so that it's only women talking to women about it, well, it gets back to the point that Noreen and Laurel made earlier, which is we'll be in the same position in 25 years' time because the other half of the population ain't feeling the pain. So we've got to all feel that pain and see it as a common injustice and a common opportunity.
Laurel, I'm interested in your experience when you were starting up. What were the barriers that you encountered because of your gender? And what, again, this is about action today. So what actions would you like to have seen in place and what actions are realisable?
Yeah, I definitely felt like I was treated in a different way, particularly in investor meetings. And, I have heard, other women entrepreneurs saying that they did bring a token man along to their investor meetings just to close the deal. And that is really kind of alarming. And, I was on a program as well where there was an actual discussion and a spreadsheet with all the VCs to avoid because there had been inappropriate behaviour, sexual kind of things that were happening to these women that were getting kind of felt up at investor meetings and,
the casting couch. But
yeah, exactly. And it was absolutely horrifying, but this was a kind of group of women who were trying to accelerate the pace in which their businesses could grow and they were experiencing all these issues. So you couldn't really publicise such a spreadsheet. It was kind of kept behind closed doors. But the fact that these things even exist is really alarming. I did a lot of reflecting, having had the startup, about my daughter. She worked with me in the business as Chief Product Officer. She was running the engineering team at a very young age and was able to do that. But I was kind of reflecting on how did that happen and what would have happened to her had those opportunities we made those opportunities happen, but she was kind of one of the lucky ones getting to work in a job in tech where she has future prospects and a great career opportunity. And then conversely, I was speaking to my nieces who are just going through high school at the moment and don't understand what a product manager is, how you can create all the amazing features in a product that you will then go on to use every day, and how is Instagram created and all the things that my daughter does in her job. The kids are not learning about all these amazing opportunities. And it just makes me really think about, obviously I was working in the digital sector, as head of digital marketing, head of digital strategy and insight, and then had my own technology startup. So I was kind of in a very fortunate position where I'd been learning for many, many years and continuing to upskill myself. But when I went into a startup, it's kind of you're now in charge of product, you're in charge of HR, you're in charge of engineering, you're in charge of finance, you're literally everything. So there was many, many things that I needed to learn really quickly, because you're kind of looking for people to work with your team. You're looking for funding, you're looking for product market fit, you're doing all these different things. And having access to some of the programs that we went on to access was just incredible. But now kind of looking back, having access to things like the Reforge program, which TechScalers runs, and being able to build product on a no-code platform, for example, those types of things at that point would have been game-changing to me. But there's a lot of access to help and support from the tech ecosystem at large, which is brilliant, and a lot of people can help you. But I think it's about not just about that; it's about the change to the overall economy if we were able to enable this. We're talking about billions worth of value added back into the economy if we can get people who are underrepresented into the relevant training and jobs. It's kind of a no-brainer, but it is concerning that there's still, speaking to my nieces and knowing what's happening in schools, etc., there's still a lack of awareness as to what are the opportunities out there, and we're not going to close the gap unless we do start making changes that early.
And Mark was talking earlier about male white privilege. Noreen, is it the case that it's hard enough for women who've got, say, an entrepreneur in the family, but if you don't have the advantages of having that in your kind of ecosystem naturally, where are they going to get that?
Well, this is the thing that, going back to one of my research papers that I did up in Dundee, where I hosted an event with 40 plus ethnic minority women, and not one of them had heard of any of the government's enterprise organisations that are on the ground helping them. So there was 40 plus women, all had small businesses, but they got through these challenges by themselves and helping each other, networking with one another. They didn't think of tapping into the available support and resources already. They didn't think of, they would never approach a university or a bank. So that was a game changer for me in terms of, okay, we have all this great support, and I know Scotland has this great ecosystem, but it's not as effective as it should be. How do we get, for example, to put it as crudely as possible, in order to make sure the support goes where it should be, can we have a return on investment for every pound that government spends on enterprise support? Can we have long-term evaluation? Can we understand what's happening at the local, smaller community levels, all the way up to, getting women into the universities, into banks, into incubators? It's across the board, and I think that's key. And I think from what I gather, and Anna can correct me if I'm wrong, that Anna's report is about inclusivity, not just women, women, women. It's about everyone. It's about those who have different environments need different measures, different support, not just, oh, well, I'm a woman and I need special assistance and support. Actually, it's not about that. It's about women are different. Men might be different, even if you're white. But actually, how do we address that? Because they need different support and advice and assistance. And it's about the inclusivity.
So it's having nuanced reaction.
Yes.
And I think the thing about the pathways as well is there's social capital being in the main demographic in entrepreneurship. It's really powerful. And it, you know, just Noreen just saying that about the fact there was 40 people in that meeting and they'd never heard of it, that will shock. It shocked me when I first started talking to you and a number of other stakeholders that exists, and I just think some parts of the ecosystem don't quite realise it's that extreme, that there's just no exposure to entrepreneurship or any understanding of it. So, I mean, that again is about going back to educating in schools, about including everybody, because we're only tapping into half. That's half of the potential of the country not being utilised.
Yeah, it's a no-brainer. And I'm
So,
going to interrupt you on
Yeah.
this because we've got some questions in. Thank you very much for sending your questions in. We've got quite a few. I'll see how many I can get through. And one of the first questions is, what's the panel's opinion on the role of universities in promoting female entrepreneurship? And what suggestions do they have for universities to enhance women's participation and provide support throughout their entrepreneurial journey? And that reminds me, thank you, questioner, because that reminds me of something somebody said to me the other day, which was, especially students going through arts and crafts kind of degrees, you're taught how to be a brilliant artist, a brilliant photographer. You're not taught how to sustain yourself economically through your skills that you're learning. So what can we do? Is there a role for universities in promoting female entrepreneurship?
Well, I'll probably hand to Mark, but initially, I mean, I'm an arts graduate, so, and I would agree there was no understanding of that. I mean, I would argue in many parts and many disciplines, it's not always that obvious. It's not just the arts, but yes, it's more noticeably perhaps not there. But, you know, universities have a critical part to play. I mean, I think we talk about the pathfinder, this route to entrepreneurship. I mean, 99% of Scotland is, you know, private economy is made up of small businesses. So, you know, we're talking, you know, a tiny percent that isn't, that's over 50 people, 100 people. So, you know, it's absolutely critical. It's the backbone of our economy. So we have to push as many people into that successfully, because that's what we live and breathe, and we need it. We need it to work well, and we need it to be vibrant. So the universities are a critical point in that journey. And how do we mould those courses? And there's certainly a number of initiatives already out there, and there's some great work being done in a number of across the universities in Scotland, and colleges, by the way. Colleges have got a very important role to play too. So, I mean, I'll probably hand over to Mark a little bit on the detail, but certainly we see it as a key stepping stone, and there's some great work going on. And I would actually say a number of universities have engaged with the sort of Pathways Forward movement, as we're calling it, because they really want to help, and they're trying to make changes. You know, I just want to highlight a lot of things that are going on here are happening out with government. There's so much we could be doing, and we are doing, and there's really ambitious, innovative, creative thinkers out there saying, right, we've already gone through the Pathways report, and I've post-it noted everything, and here's what we can do within our restricted area, but we can do all that, and we're going to embrace that. We love it. We want to do that. So we want that to continue, and universities have been probably the most engaged, or elements of universities in entrepreneurship have absolutely engaged in this. So I'm quite excited about that.
Yeah, and while Mark's getting the microphone, I'm going to do a call out to anyone watching this. If you've implemented any of the pathways or started to implement any of the pathways ideas and suggestions, please do feedback. Drop us a note through LinkedIn on the Pathways Forward site, and we will build on that. We will share it. We can cascade it. As Anna says, we're trying to make a movement here. Mark.
Yeah, thank you. Those are all great points. I think that the first thing universities can do in this regard is to be much better generally at stimulating entrepreneurship. You know, different universities are at different levels. I suspect Noreen's is at a higher level than some others. But you know, we pride ourselves at university level in in nurturing your great research and good teaching. But the very best universities on earth think of it as a triangle, which includes fostering entrepreneurship. You go to Stanford, many people go to start a company. They have 165 entrepreneurship courses for technical students alone. Most of our technical aspects of or technical departments in universities have none. So the first thing is to just get good at that. And there's an initiative as part of the wider programme called the Entrepreneurial Campus, which is to sort of create an accreditation that says if you do these things, you create more entrepreneurial capability, you prepare entrepreneurial academics for more spin-out success, etc., etc. And that includes bringing art students, design students, business school students and tech students together, so colliding them, not keeping them apart, which I think enfranchises more people in the experience and has lots of other benefits. I think the other thing universities can do, as specific regards gender, is if you look at any subject, let's take, physics or chemistry, the history of those subjects is that women were systematically written out of them. So, for example, you weren't allowed to publish because you were a woman, or you had to put your husband's name on the thing you were publishing, or, a woman led the field, but some other guy came and published something, so he got the credit for it. I mean, there's just like a huge history of why you don't find lots of women mentioned in the history books, even though they were actively participating in science. And I think we should be telling our undergraduates these stories, because if you arrive at university as a male or female, you look around and say, well, how come, there's one of 10 women in this computing course, and the risk is you post-rationalise that, say it's because women aren't as good at computing, for example. Whereas in fact, it's because you're at the end of a many-cycled vicious circle that has depleted numbers. So I think we've got to be telling these stories. We've got to be telling the story that 20, 25 years ago, the participation rates of women and men in undergraduate computing courses was about equal. And then now it's massively unequal. What happened? The home computer was marketed to boys, and that switched things. So I think we've got to, educate people as to the reality of why we get to where we get to, so they don't make up their own narratives. And it must be because men are cognitively this or women are less this, and combine that with a general entrepreneurial engine at university. It would take us a long way.
I would certainly agree with that. As somebody who, when I was on maternity leave, I had my library card taken away from me because obviously you don't want to keep up to date with your research when you're on maternity leave. Moving on. Would either of you like to come in on that? If not, I've got another question.
Can I just mention, obviously being an academic and spending, the last 10 years around university, I think universities are doing fantastic and trying to build entrepreneurial campuses. We have, and I'm talking across Scotland, I don't know every university personally, but, the general gist is that, there are a lot of entrepreneurship courses and modules. In Dundee, for example, we have Centre for Entrepreneurship at Strathclyde, their Technological Innovation Centre. These are happening, but slowly. And surely, but the thing is with universities is they're very, I'll probably get told off for saying this, archaic in terms of bureaucracy. Everything moves very slowly. So I think that doesn't help universities in the way they're run. So they're not entrepreneurial themselves. So I think we need to engage. And there is a triple helix where we try and engage with, universities, government and industry. And there is a drive to work with entrepreneurs to try and make that happen and make universities more entrepreneurial. But it is very slow. So I think a push in the right, there's a push in the right direction, just slowly, like the government.
I was just going to add that we're already partnering with some universities and colleges to deliver some technical education, and also for some of the students that are going through our programmes who already have degrees in other subject matters, they can actually go through our programme and go into year 2 or 3 in a graduate apprenticeship scheme. So, at a university, our programme has the credits that enable them to do that, and that really helps companies have a really talented, skilled person that has a speciality in something else with a history, you know, that they can have all these transferable skills and bring it into an organisation and then put the technical skills on top. So we're kind of seeing a lot of collaboration with universities and colleges and doing kind of programmes that might fit into summers and then join up with other programmes and be really, really connected. But I actually started my company sustainably with my old university. Well, it wasn't with them, but it was because of the Bright Red Triangle, where they have like the entrepreneurial, you know, a program, and you can set your business up and have it kind of incorporated in the university, which was extremely helpful to me. So, you know, there are things that are really helpful in the universities, but, you know, it's just kind of how do we all work together and make it all happen in a kind of cohesive way.
Okay, I'm going to ask all of you to give nice quick answers. We'll try and get through as many as we can of these questions in the last 5 minutes or so. Okay, now you can tell me who wants to take this one. Only 1 to 2% of equity funding goes to female entrepreneurs and is a key limitation for women trying to scale their businesses. A fund in Scotland for female founders might make a small difference, but the issue is only solved if funders globally are held accountable and change. How can we, as a small country, make a difference? You can go. Yep.
We can do a number of things. We can encourage more female VCs because they'll have better knowledge and understanding of the sort of domains that other women present. That's one of the problems today. We can only co-invest, when government co-invests with VCs that have a high proportion of female VCs. For example, I think it'd be great to publish that list that Laurel talked to about, you know, the VCs that we dare not speak their names, but they're essentially hostile to women. We should publish these things. There's ways to do that. But I think basically we've got to create any government can't control an ecosystem, and it cannot influence the rest of the world to beyond a certain level. But any levers we do have, we should use them, such as co-investment funding to put more money into those VCs that are making more progress in those areas. These are the sort of things we can think about doing.
Mm-hmm. And monitoring the progress as well. Anna?
And that goes back to incentivising that inclusive, you know, impactful way of working by encouraging, by supporting those agencies and those organisations and those angel syndicates that are investing in startup businesses to actually, you know, walk the walk and embrace that more inclusive approach. And that is why it's really important. I mean, nobody here is blaming, you know, the way it works right now. I mean, I'm not blaming Mark. I'm not blaming men. This is a systemic issue. This is not about it's his fault or it's her fault or it's their fault. It's about how do we change the way we think about this and work together to get a better outcome for everyone. And I think, you know, investing, and that's one thing that within Scotland we can do. We can actually make all the organisations that are part of it to behave and encourage a different way of working. And many are trying. But, you know, the idea of Pathways is trying to create an enabling way of working collaboratively and, you know, to make it workable and feasible. So, yeah, but it doesn't necessarily address the global piece. But there are certainly funds out there, more and more. You can talk about sustainability is a big topic. And the world is changing quite dramatically in that area in terms of funds. So, you know, there's nothing to say that we can't actually be ambitious here and make it different in this way as well.
And be a centre for best practice as well in the way that we do it.
I was going to just add on to that. There was a big piece of research done around the way that women and men are asked questions when pitching to investors. And all the women, and it was done at one of these really high-profile Silicon Valley conference pitch events where there was all these high quality women entrepreneurs and these really high quality men entrepreneurs as well. But the women were all asked these prevention questions, which was like, what's all the risk? What's the downside? What happens about this? And the men were all asked all the promotion questions. And they kind of surveyed, the research was done in such a way that identified that all the women were asked these prevention questions and all the men were asked the promotion questions, even if there was women in the audience that was on the judging panel rather. So it's like, in order to get the funding, the women would have to deconstruct the question and then answer it with a promotion answer. So it's kind of when I was doing kind of part of the work that I was doing to kind of raise funding in the startup that I was in, a lot of it was understanding those biases, and they're conscious and unconscious, and how you have to then be prepared to go in knowing you're going to get asked the prevention question with a promotion answer. You know, that's the only way, because if you go down the rabbit hole of all the risks that are going to come up, and the male counterparts not being asked about any of these aspects of the business, and it's all focused on the negative aspects and all of these things, you can go down a rabbit hole. Whereas if you answer with all the promotion answers and all the, you know, the other things that you have learned due to your training on this particular subject matter, which is really sad that you have to have this training, that you might have some success in getting funding. But it's crazy that, you know, that's the environment that we live in.
Absolutely. Noreen, I was going to ask you a really interesting question about risk that came in, but maybe you would be so kind as to answer it on the chat on LinkedIn afterwards, because I'm afraid that's all we have time for. That was a very quick hour, that was. But please, as I've been saying, please keep continuing these conversations. To do that, just follow the Pathways Forward movement on LinkedIn, and hopefully on other social media soon, where you'll be able to watch this panel in your own time. You'll be able to hear the latest news from the Pathways Report. Here we go again, the Pathways Report on new approach for women in entrepreneurship. Got to get that in once more before we go. And hear more about forthcoming Pathways events. Suggest what you'd like to hear. And most importantly, please, please, please have your say. You can't have a movement without people coming with you and sharing their ideas, and we really do want to hear from you. Meantime, thanks as ever to our supporters for helping us with this event and many more to come, including Startup Grind Scotland, Product Forge, Nile, who've kindly hosted us today, and the Freer Consultancy. Thanks, of course, to our fabulous panel, Professor Noreen Arshed, Laurel Quinn, Mark Logan and Anna Stewart. Thank you for watching and for your amazing questions. We hope to see you again soon. But from me, Vanessa Collingridge, bye for now.